Hello, everyone. Welcome back to What the Deaf podcast.
We are thrilled to be here today with Michael Epstein. He is a deaf graphic designer who's involved in a lot of different projects in the entertainment industry, specializing in graphic design. So we are so excited to learn about your experience as a deaf graphic designer. Before we dig into all of our curious questions, tell us about your background and how you got to who you are today.
Okay. Hello, everyone. Good morning. Thank you for having me here. My name is Michael. My name sign is an M on the temple. I was born deaf to an all-hearing family, raised using simultaneous communication at home, signing, speaking, also wearing hearing aids. So a variety of different modalities of language going on. My older sibling is hearing. My younger brother is deaf. So there's two of us in the family now. My family knows sign language. And like I said, we speak a variety of different modes of communication in the home.
So I'm curious, your parents know sign language too, right? Your parents. Okay, so I'm curious, what is your guys' preferred mode of communication? Do you guys sign with each other or use your voices?
Well, so there's five of us in the family, my two parents. And then, like I said, my older sibling who's hearing, and then myself and my younger brother who is deaf. So my oldest sibling typically would sign and speak. So simultaneous communication pretty much all the time. My parents would typically speak only with me and then sign and speak with my brother. But for me, growing up at home, the whole family would sign and speak at the same time so that all of the adults and everyone in the family had access to communication. My parents didn't have a lot of opportunities to practice sign language anywhere else than in the home. But personally, when I was younger, I preferred to only speak. I did not use sign language, but I was required to sign around my family because of my brother. But I preferred to speak. And even when I spoke only, my family would sign back to me. So like I said, once my brother was born deaf, everyone in the family would sign and speak at the same time, simultaneous communication for his benefit. I preferred speaking most of the time as a child. I was very self-conscious about people looking at me if I started using sign language. I didn't want to stand out. So I tried to just speak only, not use my hands to communicate. But my parents would tell me, you have to sign. I need you to sign. They would sign to me and I would refuse to sign back.
Yeah, I'm very similar. Very similar in my upbringing. I would speak with my parents because my parents didn't sign growing up. My mom signed a little bit, my dad not so much. But I was embarrassed to sign with my parents. I would even tell my mom, don't sign. Stop. I didn't want to sign with them. I wanted to speak with my parents. And my parents did expose me to as much sound and as much language as possible. And I even learned ASL in school. So they did give me those options, which is very similar, but different at the same time with your story. And again, it's just another layer of the different types of deaf individuals.
Right. And there's a lot of people that when I speak would ask, oh, you're hard of hearing. And I would say, no, I'm deaf. And they would say, well, you can hear though, right? And my answer was always, well, kind of. I wear hearing aids. I can hear some music. But there's a lot of factors that go into that. I can hear sound, but I can't always identify speech. Sometimes I can. So, communication, clear communication depends on the person. Again, there's a variety of factors that go into that. And in addition to that, growing up, I practiced the ability to hear. I trained my ears to listen to specific sounds. So I think that maybe that's an unusual part of my upbringing. Not all deaf people did that at home. That was a daily process for me, focusing on sound and training myself to identify different sounds. And, I'm grateful that my parents gave me that option. Speak if you want, sign if you want, just try to use your residual hearing if you want. So that's a different upbringing than, maybe someone else who's deaf. And, that's just an assumption that I'm making because I don't know other people who have had that experience. It's not the same for everyone. It's a part of the expectation of each individual and how they choose to be. So for me, it was different. My parents were very open people. They wanted language access for me, whether it be sign, sound, the ability to speak. They provided me every avenue and allowed me to make the decision for myself as to how I wanted to communicate. And I'm grateful to them for that.
Yeah, I don't typically see a lot of people that really get into graphic design. So what piqued your interest about it? Or how did you discover that field?
So I grew up very fascinated with design. Originally, I wanted to become an architect. I wanted to do theater sets. I was very fascinated with that. So I went to college and studied theater set design and projection design for theater specifically. When I graduated from college, I was trying to figure out exactly what it is that I wanted to do. And I felt like I wanted to make sets for things like the VMA award shows. Olympic opening ceremonies, big flashy venues. And I was really fascinated and intrigued by that. So I moved to LA to pursue that dream. And when I arrived in LA, I started working as a production assistant, a PA in the art department, entry-level job, and was able to move up from there to get to where I am now. I was able to join the Art Directors Guild, ADG, and their union, and have the title of official graphic designer. I've been working through the union as a graphic designer for roughly 5 years now. And I think the reason that I was so fascinated with graphic design is because of the use of software. I really enjoy using technology, and I'm really good at it. And, when you start out as a PA in the art department, in the entertainment industry, you're doing a variety of different things. You're grabbing lunch for people, you're doing script breakdowns, you're printing different items, you're in a variety of different areas. So I was able to see all of these different jobs. I was able to watch what set designers do, what art directors do, what production folks do. And so at that point, it gave me some time to reflect and figure out what it was that I wanted by observing all of these other people in the field and figure out what was the best fit for me. And at that point is when I decided graphic design.
I'm wondering, with your job, do you think you bring any special skills as a deaf graphic designer? Do you think you bring like a different perspective or something unique that people realize, wow, you bring something amazing to the table?
So my deaf experience and my deaf knowledge doesn't really come into play in my design work. My work that I do currently is not really about being deaf. But I did projection design for theater, which I was working with Deaf West prior to COVID. Unfortunately, the show had to stop because of COVID, but I was doing projection design and I was involved in working on captioning for the actors. And I was the only person on the design team that could sign fluently. So at that point, I was then able to provide my perspective. Is this accessible for the deaf actors? Is this clear? Are we actually matching what the signs are? Because other people, the light designer, the set designer, they did not know sign language. But as designers, they could ask me as a team member, because I know the design world and sign language, to check and make sure things were accessible. Things like, is the lighting bright enough? Are there things in the way of the visual space? So because of that, I was able to share my experience as a deaf individual. However, in my current line of work, my deafness, I don't want to call it separate, but it really doesn't come up often in the line of work that I'm currently in.
But I think that's amazing too, because I love the fact that you're doing something that is mainstream and you just happen to be deaf. It's not a part of who you are as a graphic designer. And your deaf identity is separate from that. While you bring so much to the table, but the job doesn't require you to be deaf. And the fact that you're doing it is amazing.
So I'm wondering, typically graphic designers work by themselves on the computer, designing and working with clients. You actually have a team. So what kind of accommodations do you have to communicate with your team and work with your clients one-on-one? Do you have specific accommodations that you need in your office?
So one thing I think that about graphic design that is a good fit for me as a deaf person is because, like you just said, I can often work alone. I'm on the computer a large part of the day working by myself. But when I do interact with the rest of my team, we interact in a variety of different ways, whether it be email, text, chat on the computer. I still work in person in the office with a variety of other people, whether it be the art director, the set director. There's a variety of different people at play. And so a lot of times my meetings are one-on-one. If the department has a request, they'll send me an email with a picture and say, okay, so we have this thing we're looking for you to design. Here's what we need. Here's the sizing. And they provide all of the information in that email. So I can go in person and actually see it with another individual. And one-on-one, I'm able to, with my hearing aids and lip reading, communicate fairly fluently without sign language. Again, let me emphasize that's one-on-one. Typically, if I need clarification, we can write it down, or we can, again, go back to email. If we need, let's say, like 2 feet by 6 inches, that's just an example of something, a measurement. So I can then go in person, show them what I've made, and we have an opportunity to communicate and work things out. If I'm live on set with a variety of different people, there's a lot of pressure there because there's more individuals. But again, I can ask for clarification, I can text, I can write something down. So I've been doing this for years now. Most of the people I work with know who I am. They understand who I am and I understand who they are. And they know sometimes to make sure that things are clear, to maybe slow it down a little bit. And most of the people I work with are pretty conscientious of that. So that's how I access communication most of the time.
So previously you said that all of your coworkers now know how you operate. They know what your needs are and they accommodate that. So at the beginning of your career, did you feel like you had to prove yourself as a deaf graphic designer that you had the expertise to be a part of that team?
In the beginning, I needed that support. I needed to build that trust. But now that I've established myself, I feel capable and able to say, no, I'm not going to take a phone call. I'm not going to do this, that, or the other. And if you don't want to hire me for that reason, that's fine. Then you don't need to hire me because I can do my own thing. I'm capable of that. Working with production designers, when they hire me for a specific show or when they hire anyone, they select their specific team. They select who they want. And there are a few production designers that I've worked with over the years, a variety of times. There's 3 or 4 of them that will hire me time and time again. So that helps a lot because I'm prioritized in those departments. Other directors that I work with or other heads of departments will often specifically choose me for that job. So that gives me more authority, maybe not the right word, but the ability to advocate for myself, to be supported, to work with other people. And if there's a problem that arises for whatever reason, they realize, oh, I was hired by the top dog, the top person, and not by them. So that helps me with my representation and the validity that I carry on set. So I really am appreciative of those who have lifted me up and helped me gain those experiences and those jobs. At the end of the day, your skill is what matters. So as long as you're able to meet deadlines, as long as you're friendly, as long as you are a good person to hang out with, you are easy to get along with and work together. And I mean, I'm aware of a lot of the privileges that I carry as well. I have the ability to speak and sign and use my hearing aids to communicate. So I feel like I kind of am what you would call maybe hearing passing sometimes. And I can code switch and I can do what I need to do to match other people's expectations. So, and I'm not trying to say that part of my job is to hide my deafness. That's not my point. But I am able to make sure that I understand what others are saying without requesting a lot of accommodations from them. So again, this is more of me talking about my line of work, what I'm doing, and moving up to where I am now. But currently, after those years, I'm comfortable saying, no, I'm not going to do this. I'm not going to do that. And here's what I need. I feel much more comfortable requesting things. Whereas in the very beginning, it was really difficult to do that. And also one thing that honestly frustrates me a lot is Reddit. Reddit has their own group for deaf individuals. And there's a lot of posts from young deaf people asking about what's a good job for a deaf individual and how can I do this or how can I do that? But their expectations of what they can do are so limited. So they're asking questions of like, what job will fit me as a deaf person? Not what do I actually want to do with my life? What are my interests? What skills do I have? What are my abilities that I bring to the table? What is it that I want to do? And then navigate that space and find something that is good for them as a person. So I feel like it's a really backwards perspective. And it's incredibly frustrating for me to see that in the deaf community. It's a huge problem. And at the same time, I understand the difficulty. If I was a signing only person, and, being in an everyday world where you didn't have to speak, you didn't have to lip read, there's a comfortability there where you can find your roots and access your coworkers, your friends, the space around you. So I understand to a point why maybe it's not easier, but it's comfortable to go into a field of predominantly deaf people, becoming a teacher, working with deaf students, things of that nature. And I respect those fields greatly. I feel like we should be allowed to have accessibility. I understand that people want social life and understanding and clear communication. But I went to an all hearing university with an interpreter. I was mainstreamed as an only deaf child in an all hearing school my whole life. So my driving force as a graphic designer was something that I decided I wanted to do for me. And so there were a lot of things that I had to let go of. I sacrificed my social life. I sacrificed access to communication. There were a lot of things that I really didn't have in my life. And not until about 5 years ago was I able to reacclimate, re-enter the deaf community. Because when I realized this is the career I wanted, and there are no other deaf people in this career, I had to figure out a way to make that work. And so I have more deaf friends now. I socialize more within the deaf community. And I realize at this point, when I go to a weekend with all my deaf friends and I leave my hearing aids behind, it's a burden that has been lifted. I feel so much lighter in that space, in that environment, because I realize at that point how much work I have to do on a daily basis at my job, at my place of work. And I've become so accustomed to that I don't realize how difficult that is on the day to day until I'm with my deaf friends on the weekends. So I feel somewhat conflicted about that.
Yeah, I relate with that so much. I feel very parallel with you. And it's funny because growing up, it was just part of me being part of the hearing world, turning my hearing aids on and just going with the flow. And it wasn't until I really interacted with the deaf community and having Carly, my best friend, I finally felt like I can just focus on me and my connections with people. I don't have to worry about communication barriers or making sure that I am accommodating the hearing world and reading their lips. So that freedom of just being grounded and breathing again was a huge part of my life that I found.
For me, I feel like my experience was completely the opposite because growing up, I was very involved in the deaf community. And like you said, when I saw my future, I saw myself working with deaf individuals. I never really saw myself getting into a career field that did not involve the deaf community because that's my upbringing, that's my comfort zone, that's my home. Until I decided to move to Los Angeles and started this What the Deaf production, I went through a lot of roadblocks where I was constantly reminded that I am deaf. I have to ask for my accommodations and just having that burden, it's exhausting. And we just started this production and this podcast. We've already gone through so many things that are just exhausting. But seeing you say at the beginning of your career field was rough. And now you've gotten to a point where people know you. I'm still building my network here within What the Deaf Productions, but it sucks having to feel that burden. And I cannot wait to get rid of that burden and have them know what my needs are, my accommodations, and that I need an interpreter at all times. So our experiences are different, but I get that feeling of having that burden and responsibility as a deaf person.
Well, the other thing that I wanted to add to that, maybe another perspective, let's say you have a deaf actor who goes to set for, I don't know, 4 or 5 days to shoot a specific episode. They're expected to be there all day working with other people. So there's an interpreter that's been provided. And at that point, they're trying to maximize the use of that interpreter with space, time, budget within that short period of time. So an interpreter is provided. But I work Monday through Friday, and I've been doing that for 5 years now, whether it be an 8-month project or a 9-month project. Most of the time, I'm working alone. However, every once in a while, I have to attend a meeting or go to a location where there's really loud background noises. And I know that I may not understand fully. Do I need an interpreter? Probably. But what does that look like? Am I going to ask for an interpreter to sit around in the office for that 5% of the day where I might need them for communication? That's not really realistic as a solution for me because of what I do, because of the way I work. And that's frustrating to see actors saying, well, why don't you just request an interpreter? One will be provided to you. And I understand that, but it doesn't always work that way. There are struggles within that. You know, someone might ask me, why do you need an interpreter? And then even when I get one, will they be a qualified interpreter? It's not really an option that I have on a day-to-day basis. And then again, let's talk about COVID with masks. And that's a whole new struggle that comes up, a whole new barrier that have come into play now. Because I've been so creative my whole life with solutions and strategies of how to access communication, listening, lip reading, all of the tools that I have developed and honed into my life to be able to communicate with people. And then people started wearing masks, and I had to completely readjust everything I do, my approach to everything. I had to figure out how I was going to communicate with people. And I realized at that point how truly deaf I am because of those masks. And I think that just recently, I finally was able to start figuring out, you know what, let me give you an example. I used to read lips, look at people's faces, and now they have a mask on. Obviously, I can't understand them. So what do I do now? I close my eyes. I close my eyes and listen to whatever I'm able to pick up, try to focus on sound, because if my eyes are open, I'm expecting to read your lips and I can't see them now. And I'm not able to accommodate that. So I pretend like I'm talking on the phone. I pretend like that's the only access I have is through my ears. And I try to listen. And it's helped me a lot. I know it sounds really strange to say, but it's helped a lot.
That's really interesting.
I should try that. I don't think it's going to work for me though, because I rely a lot on lip reading. And with COVID going on, I even talked about this in one episode that I didn't realize how deaf I actually am because I rely so much on lip reading. I mean, even Carly had to interpret for me for the most part.
So you previously mentioned that with the deaf community, there's a lot of different intersectionality layers. There's different experiences, journeys, and identities. So how do you think the entertainment industry best represents the deaf community?
I think we have to remember to include, as you said, the diversity within the deaf community. Because deafness is not the only thing that people experience. People within the deaf community additionally experience racism, sexism, other kinds of discrimination, not having access to communication, other barriers. So for a deaf person to tell another deaf person, oh, we're the same. What works for me should also work for you. That is absolutely not true. Clearly, it's not true. Even another white deaf male, if they came alongside me and we had a conversation, their need to access communication would be different. Their experience would be different. A Black deaf person faces so many more barriers than I do. And there's a huge problem within the entertainment industry when it comes to racism and sexism, barriers that people face. And I recognize my privilege as a white man. And I still have barriers to access as far as communication is concerned, but that is the only barrier that I have. And again, I have the ability to speak. And so that is a privilege of mine that I have to recognize. And that is different than other deaf individuals. So for me to say, oh, well, I'm deaf, and if I've succeeded, you can too. That's not an honest way to approach the situation because there's so many problems within the deaf community that people don't recognize. We share a common experience. However, at the same time, we need to recognize that there are a variety of different experiences that we don't all share as well. And trying to minimize one's struggle and minimize their experience by saying, oh, well, we're the same. Well, your limitations as a deaf person are your problem. That is absolutely not true.
Yeah. And that's one thing that we've noticed with our podcast is that there are many people within our community that are so different. And how we as a community can be welcoming to all different types of deaf individuals and accept them for who they are. There's not one label of deaf. There's so many colors and layers and beautiful things. And we need to be welcoming to more people within our community. And there's not one standard label of deaf. And that's okay. We want to make sure our platform is truly welcoming to all.
For a long time, I felt that I wasn't included in the deaf community because I wasn't an active participant. And so for me, I wanted to do this particular thing in my life. And the deaf community was not a part of that. So I would socialize with them, but I still wanted to do this thing. I had my eye on this goal and I would do whatever it took to be a part of that, whether it meant I had to speak, whether it meant I didn't use sign language. I sacrificed a lot to obtain that goal that I had in mind.
So Sarah and I have had this conversation before. Sarah, as a deaf actress, she's acknowledged that she has the privilege of being able to speak like you. And I've always told her, do whatever you need to do to get the role that you want and that is the best fit for you, as long as you know your position within the deaf community. It's not her responsibility to represent everybody in the deaf community, but to let them know in the entertainment industry that there are other people who want that job, who want to be a part of the entertainment industry, but they might have other needs and they need to understand that. Instead of just, going on with your privilege and not recognizing that, we need to let them know that we do have a beautiful community behind us. We have more people that would love to be a part of the entertainment industry and be a part of your company. So how can we best work together and open up more opportunities?
And often, like you said, we have a choice as a deaf individual. Do I do what's best for me or do I do what's best for the deaf community in that moment? And sometimes you have to decide that you're going to be selfish and do what you need to do for yourself in that moment. And it's a difficult decision to make because it leaves you feeling torn. I have a responsibility to provide that representation, to show other deaf people that maybe don't have that opportunity. But this is something that I also want to do for me. So it can be complicated and it can leave you feeling very conflicted. And I think that it's important to really sit and reflect and think in that moment, what do I have? For me, for example, why am I successful? My parents gave me language access at a young age. They gave me the ability to speak. My parents were able to afford not only hearing aids, but speech therapy for me growing up. I was able to go to an expensive university. So I have all of these different privileges, and that package makes up who I am, my ability to access the world around me. My parents gave me that head start and that opportunity that maybe a lot of other deaf people in the community don't have. In addition to that, I'm a white male. So there are so many different parts of who I am. And at that moment, I need to reflect and recognize on my situation, my success, things that are specific to me and only to me. And if I want to help other deaf people, how can I do that in an honest and open way? How can I incorporate the differences in language use? How can I incorporate the different isms, the different barriers that the deaf community faces? And how can I be a good ally for all of those different things that I just mentioned? What can I do to provide that help to the community? And for people with any kind of privilege, have to think about that. And that doesn't mean you should beat yourself up and criticize yourself for not doing certain things, but also recognizing that in addition to hard work, talent, and skill, but also recognizing what else you've brought to the table in your privileges and how you can use those to support others.
To recognize that is what makes you a beautiful person. We need more people to be able to open up and understand the privileges that we have and consider what we could do to make this world a beautiful place. So I really appreciate you sharing that.
Thank you for that. Another thing I wanted to share was a recent experience I had. I was with a group of oral deaf people. So those who grew up with cochlear implants who did not use sign language at all to communicate. They have their own set of different experiences being deaf. So think about one of those individuals as a deaf actor that goes in to audition for a deaf character. They don't know sign language and they're provided with a sign language interpreter. But when they arrive, they say, no, I need closed captioning. I need to be able to see you to lip read. Is that accessible for that deaf person in that audition? It's not. So think about that one deaf person that shows up to the audition and they're told, oh, I'm sorry, you don't look deaf enough. You don't know sign language. Oh, are you really deaf? So that's something else that we need to acknowledge. Not all deaf people are users of American Sign Language. There are a lot of deaf people who use sign, don't get me wrong, but there are many who don't. And we need to acknowledge that those people are still very much a part of our community and need that support. So there's a network of people who can share their experiences and support each other and lift each other up. There are so many different things happening within our community. And the more I grow up, the more I interact with people of different walks of life, the more I realize there are so many different things happening. And the more I appreciate the value of not only supporting others, but listening to their stories, allowing them to have that opportunity and that space to share their struggles and not have to compete with who has the most issues, who's experienced the most barriers in life. It's not a competition. It's about acknowledging all of the different things that we've all experienced, supporting people in whatever way they need support, and just listening to their stories. And I've really enjoyed seeing that. And I'm seeing it more as of recent. And I hope we continue to see more of that. I hope that the deaf community will become more open-minded about the experiences of others, about racism, about internalized oppression, internalized prejudice, the belief and the thought about it should only be for ASL users. Or here's this group over here of people that use, signing exact English. And then here's people over here that use Black Sign Language, BASL. We don't know everyone's circumstances. We don't know everyone's background. We don't know their experiences. We all just need to take a breath and listen more.
What gaps do you think are missing, and how can we fill in those gaps to let bigger platforms know that we are happy that they want to represent the deaf community, but there are also a lot of layers that need to be considered?
One thing I feel like my perspective may be a little different than others because, as I said, I'm not a writer or a director and I'm not a performer. So my perspective is more the business side of the entertainment industry. And I think that if you go to set, you'll see so many. And when I say so many, I'm talking hundreds and hundreds of people on set working in a variety of different jobs and responsibilities, contributing to the overall set. And there's no deaf people. And there's not a lot of women represented. There's not a lot of Black, Indigenous people of color, or what we call BIPOC, represented. There are a lot of white men. And a lot of those union jobs are passed down within families because in order to get into the union, oftentimes you need someone to represent you. So these kids will join the union after their parents. And so I think if you're a writer or a director or a creative person, you have to think about your next project and what you want to do next and use your own lived experience to do that. However, if you're surrounded by white men, if you're surrounded by hearing people, then your own experience that you bring to the table is very limited. On the flip side, imagine if you went to get your makeup done and the makeup artist was deaf, or if you went to the hairdresser and the hairdresser is a wheelchair user. Or, I mean, think of all the different things. Think about if you have an assistant and your assistant uses a cane or speaks a different language. There are so many different things that you can imagine in your workspace being more diverse. And then you, at that point, as a creative person, when you're working on your next project, you've already experienced all of these different walks of life. So why can't we just write someone into the show who happens to be in a wheelchair? It doesn't have to be a part of the plot in order to write that in. So put a deaf character on the show and have a real understanding of how they communicate, because now you have worked with a deaf person every single day as a part of your daily life. So that representation is really important. Representation behind the scenes. The writer's room needs writers with authentic stories, directors understanding what's happening. And all of that is true, but there's so much more depth to this conversation. There are so many things that should be happening, experiences that could be spotlit and exposed to the different lives of other people. For example, I'm gay, and I think the queer movement or coming out as a gay person, I feel like a lot of that is just helping people recognize, oh, there's gay people everywhere. You have gay lawyers, you have gay people working in your office, your neighbor might be gay, and it creates that understanding that the queer community is everywhere. And I think the same applies to the disability community. We need to just think of disabled people as other people in the world, other people in the workplace. It should be mundane. It should be part of my daily lived experience. It should be, oh, my neighbor's deaf. My hairdresser is deaf. My assistant is a wheelchair user. It just needs to be part of our daily, boring lived experience. So on set, I think it's crucial to have that diversity for that exact reason, for all the reasons I just mentioned, to expose people to those different experiences. So back to being a graphic designer, it's a great fit for me because there's not a lot of interaction with other people. I work alone a lot of the time. I'm not running a big crew or having large meetings. And so that particular job is a good fit for a deaf person. But there are a lot of other jobs in the entertainment industry, like hair, makeup, special effects, stunt people, those who build or paint props on set that don't involve really large meetings on a daily basis, that don't involve having to socialize, maybe working one-on-one. You know, we need to paint this color, and the person can go do the job. Very simple, clear directions. You can write things down easily. You can send information via email. It's not like when you think of the writer's room, the conversations and the back and forth that's happening. That could definitely be a challenging situation and environment, but there's jobs behind the scenes that can be very easily adapted to others in the community. And I acknowledge that, you know, the socializing with deaf people would be different with your friends, with your coworkers, having that ability to use sign language and having access. But there are so many jobs that are accessible to the deaf community that a deaf person could do well. So how do we bring those deaf people in? How do we accommodate them in that line of work? I think there needs to be partnerships set up between universities and schools for the deaf with the entertainment industry. Professionals like showrunners, people with different jobs that work behind the scenes to teach the community, hey, FYI, we have all these different jobs on set that are available to you. We have stunt people. We have greens people. We have people that specifically work to set up greenery, plants, and flowers on set. And a lot of people don't realize jobs like that exist. There are so many jobs that can be very easily accommodated for the deaf community. So I think that representation, I mean, there's so many people, my hearing friends don't even know half of the jobs that exist on set. Like, oh, somebody made that guitar and then lit it on fire, for example. Every time you're on set, when it rains, someone is working the machine that's making it rain. And people don't realize that. So I feel that there needs to be a push to represent all of the different jobs on set, in front of the camera, behind the camera, to show that there are so many different places that are accommodating to the deaf community. I also think with the entertainment industry, there's so many jobs that are unionized. So you have that support. You can access that support. You have insurance, you have other benefits. And that's incredibly helpful. Think about wanting to start up your own business. It can be really difficult dealing with establishing a clientele, dealing with marketing. But if you're using that same skill in a job in the entertainment industry, you don't have to worry about that. You don't have to worry about establishing a client base or marketing. You can just be who you are with your skill as a worker. And there's a lot of different jobs that could accommodate deaf people, people with a variety of other disabilities. You have good pay, you have protection, you have union representation, if any issues with accessibility. And so there's a lot of support there for diversity.
Really well said. That brings a lot of light to show people that we can do it. And there are many opportunities for us. We just have to find it.
However, I feel like it's not only for us to recognize that there are a lot of job opportunities that we could find, but for the hearing community to also recognize that and the importance of providing accommodations, because it's exhausting. I might want a job that is an amazing fit for me. I'm motivated, but I also can't really play two different roles. I can't do my job and also continue to explain my needs as a deaf individual. I mean, it becomes exhausting very quickly for me. If the entertainment industry and their platform are able to recognize and understand the importance of providing accessibility, we can just be us without explaining why I need an interpreter and why another deaf individual doesn't need one, or why one can talk and one can't. You know, for them to understand and see the different layers within our community and provide the right accommodations, that's all we need.
Right. And so obviously you and I have different requirements. So for me going in, I think that I'm kind of like, I'm deaf 101. I'm the easy to deal with deaf person from a hearing person's perspective. Anyway, I can speak. I'm willing to lip read to get by. When people interact with me, they're like, oh, he's a deaf person, but they feel comfortable with me and they have an understanding a little bit about deaf people. But if another person comes in, speaks with an accent, has different communication requirements, then each time you interact with a deaf person, you're broadening that understanding. You're dealing with the understanding of diversity, the differences in access, the fact that hiring an interpreter is really not that difficult. It's not as complicated as we thought. It's not always as expensive as we thought. So there's all of these different situations. My role as a deaf person is different than your role as a deaf person when it comes to opening doors. So I would just say, like, you know, the superficial deaf experience or just one perspective of deafness. But then you add more people to that and you expand that knowledge and that diversity. It's more than just like every character on TV is a deaf person who signs. Do you know what I mean? Do you understand where I'm going with that? I think that it's tough to explain my experience, my quote unquote success story, because that doesn't apply to every other deaf individual. And it's important that I figure out how I can use my success to help other deaf people. And sometimes I really honestly have no idea what I can do. And I think, oh, this is a great idea to try. And then that idea doesn't work. Another example of deaf presence would be on the show The Mandalorian. There is a group of characters, I'll call them aliens, on the show who use signs to communicate. And we needed to develop a signed language for this group of people. And everyone was talking about what that would look like and what we should do. So there was a person on set who was friends with Troy. I'm blanking on his last name. Yes, Kotzer. And so she said, oh, well, I'm friends with this deaf person, Troy. You should hire him to develop sign for these characters. And so everyone thought that was a great idea. And he was able to come in to set and work on this signed language, which was a mix of American Sign Language, Japanese Sign Language, and some newly created signs. And that deaf individual was there because someone else on set had an idea and said, oh my gosh, I know this deaf person. I know someone who can do this. And if that hearing person had not been there, Troy would not have been involved in this project. So that's another example of why it's important to have deaf people be part of that everyday life.
And this conversation is amazing. There's so many layers to it. So thank you for sharing all of your thoughts and your heart and just everything. We really appreciate you taking the time to go in depth and have this discussion about life, jobs, and community. We really appreciate you for that. And now I'm wondering, do you have any questions for us that you want to ask or anything that you're curious about?
I do have a question, actually. I'm curious because Sarah, you have acting experience. You've been an actor for quite some time. Your parents are involved in the industry. So you have what I would call that insider experience growing up as being a part of that industry. Now, Carly, you're new on scene. You're trying to get into the industry in a variety of different ways. So Carly, what have you learned from Sarah about the entertainment industry as a first-time person experiencing that? And then Sarah, looking at Carly having kind of fresh eyes in the industry, what have you experienced or learned from Carly?
Really, I've learned a lot. Again, I grew up in a hearing family where I just went along and spoke. I didn't sign with my family. I didn't sign with my family friends within the entertainment industry. So they only saw one side of a deaf identity, which was mine. And that was it. They never really knew how much work I had to put into it to really understand them and to really dive into the conversations. It was interesting because it wasn't until Carly came and we started the podcast and started to really be a part of the entertainment industry that all of my dad's family friends started coming up to me and said, Sarah, I didn't realize how much work you had to put in and how much you had to do for us. And not only that, and now that they've met Carly, who has a completely different deaf identity, who needs an interpreter and who needs other accommodations that could also use too, but I decided not to. And now they've seen two different perspectives and two different types of deaf individuals. They're like, oh, it's more than just Sarah. So I've learned that I did just go along with it growing up, which was fine. But I also acknowledged how much work I had to put into it and how hard it was. But I just went along with it.
As for me, I came in with fresh eyes into the entertainment industry and seeing what the process looked like behind the scenes, it was an eye opener for me. Before I would see a TV show with a deaf character and I'd be like, yeah, that doesn't represent us, right? That's not who I am. That doesn't fit me. Why are they doing that? But now I see what goes on behind the scenes. I didn't realize that there's a lot more to it than just the film. I see the beautiful final product, but like you said, behind the scenes, they bring in an ASL coach, an ASL expert, and all these things. I didn't know about any of that. Plus, with Sarah, I've noticed her insecurities as a deaf person within the entertainment industry. Before, I would be like, Sarah, you need to acknowledge your privileges. You're capable of speaking. You have more privileges than other deaf actors who don't speak. And I remind her of those. But now I see the hesitation that she has because of how the entertainment industry works and how they run their auditions. They give her 3 choices, and she's insecure about having to carry that burden as a deaf person who can talk. And I see that now. And so that lights a fire in me, and I want to change that. I want to fill in those gaps and allow deaf people to do their jobs without feeling those insecurities as a deaf person. And that's my passion.
But I think that that's a really big part of this. You know, there was a period in my life where I thought, okay, well, if I wasn't deaf, this is how my life would be. This is how it would be different. You know what I mean? And so I have hearing friends, and, you know, we've had some really deep conversations about their experiences as a hearing individual. And my understanding of what it means to be hearing is actually different now than it was before because of those conversations. Being hearing is not some magic thing where you'll understand everything in the world and find success. And I've realized that, of course, it's a different experience, but it's not as, you know, magical as I thought. If you can hear, everything will work out for you beautifully. That's not true. And I think that sometimes when you're frustrated, when you encounter barriers in your life, you come to think, well, if I wasn't this way, or if I wasn't that way, I'd be successful. I'd become rich. I would have all of these other things. And that's just not true. It's not true at all. You work hard. Like, think about my situation. I work 70, 80 hours a week sometimes. I work on a second, third, fourth side job part-time. I'm successful, but I have worked really, really hard and I've put in the hours and it's been tough. But someone who sees that and says, maybe, well, I want to become a famous actor, but I'm deaf, therefore I can't. And I think to myself, really? Because there are so many beautiful hearing people with white privilege and with all of these other privileges that try to become famous, and it doesn't necessarily work out for them either. So who knows? Really, who knows what the magical formula is to make that work? We can't assume that what works for one person will or won't work for the other. People have their own space to make those decisions for themselves. Saying I'm hearing as, I'm white as, I can speak, or I'm deaf, or you have to decide for yourself in your career or whatever your goals may be. And it can cause some internal conflict. It's not everything is great. I have no responsibilities and I don't have to worry about it. It's not that way. But we should honor and understand other people and their right to make those choices for themselves and to not judge them for that.
Yeah, and that's something that I had to learn as well, because growing up, I did say that I couldn't become an actress. Even though my parents are a part of the entertainment industry, I never thought it was for me because I'm deaf and because I have a crooked smile. But then I looked within, I'm like, no, I want to break the glass ceiling. I want to represent myself as Sarah. But with that being said, there's a lot of insecurities and doubts within me of like how to best represent myself and what is the right thing to do and who am I? And again, with Carly's help, I realized a lot of things. And I mean, I'm still not perfect. There's still so much insecurity within me, and I'm still trying to figure out and unpack myself. But just like you said, Michael, I really have to be okay with not trying to be this bubbly, shining, perfect person. No, I'm a human being, and being human is working through your struggles and acknowledging all the things that happen in your life. And that's okay. You don't have to be this picture perfect person. You really don't. Again, I'm trying so hard to figure out my identity and who I am because, again, it's going to be a lifelong journey of self-discovery. But by having these conversations with Carly, with you, Michael, and a lot of the behind the scenes discussions, I can start to figure out what is the right thing to do. But I know that I want people to allow other human beings to give them space to explore their journeys without that judgment as well.
And honestly, I really admire deaf people who live their lives publicly and openly as a deaf person. Every time you perform in something, there are other deaf people looking to you. And like Carly said, well, that's not my deaf experience. That's not the experience I've lived. Everyone has their own view. But you're living publicly as a deaf person, whereas I'm not. I'm not in that environment. I can deal with my deafness. I don't have to have those daily conversations with people about it. I can choose to just put my deafness aside and focus on other things. And that's another privilege that I have. And I appreciate having that private space for myself where I can develop my own thoughts without the public view of the deaf community. And I'm grateful for that. But I look up to people like you who are so open publicly about your deafness and figuring out your identity and yourself in front of a live audience of deaf people. I really do admire that.
And I think we need to do that. Luckily, Carly and I are able to have these kinds of open discussions, knowing that we're going to have an audience to discuss it with, but it has to be done. We have to see both perspectives, and we want our audience to see that there's no solution to anything. There's no easy dialogue about this. And we want to continue to not push things away, because how will people learn? How will I learn? How will I grow? And so we want to continue to open this discussion and be vulnerable. If you can accept that, that's great. But if not, then move on. I want people with positive energy, and we want to bring forth those interactions, and we want people who are willing to listen. If you're not, then bye. We don't need you.
It's very true. It's very true.
I feel like I'm half like Sarah and half like Michael. I'm not fully in front of the camera, so I can't visualize myself as a deaf actor. It's not my thing. But I think for me to get a little taste of what the entertainment industry is like, I feel like I can bring that to the deaf community and educate them on what behind the scenes looks like and how that setting makes deaf people feel within the entertainment industry, and how we as a community can change that dynamic and make it a better place for everybody and empathize. Old me probably would have looked at you and said, oh, you're a deaf graphic designer, but you can talk. So you had an easier in than I did. But I recognize the struggles that you went through and how you had to accommodate your needs. And it was a lot of work for you to represent the deaf community within your business. That's incredible.
Well, and part of the reason I chose this profession is because I'm deaf. If I wasn't deaf, I might be an art director or be doing something else in the industry. But I chose this role partially because of my deafness, because of my limitations to access. And one thing I think that would be a big next step is to create a pipeline for deaf individuals, to establish entry-level jobs for deaf people, to provide that training and allow them to move up and climb the ladder, to be a part of different internships, different roles, to have experiences behind the camera as a cinematographer, as a makeup artist, and to really establish that pipeline. Sorry, both of you were going to say something and I interrupted.
No, that's perfect. And this is why we expanded our What the Deaf from just a podcast to a production company. That's our goal, is to start something like that. Open up to the entertainment industry and show them that we have a lot of deaf individuals who have a lot to contribute to your platform. But we need you to understand the accommodations that you need to provide so that we can build this beautiful bridge and collaborate and make this industry a fun place for anyone who wants to work there. That's our goal.
Right. And one thing I wanted to add is about the show Deaf U.
Yeah.
One thing that I really, really liked about that show is, and I do believe it was a part of their contract, I'm not sure, but they required the actual show to hire deaf people to work on crew for a variety of different jobs. But one of them, for a reality show in the hearing world, you would listen and write down everything that is being said. But on Deaf U, they hired a lot of deaf people to watch these videos and write down what was being signed. And those people got experience on set working on a show. They gained experience working with a crew of editors, with cinematographers. And now those people can apply those skills to other jobs, to other shows. They can say they have that experience as a cinematographer, as someone working in the editing room. And that opens the door for a lot of other people. And it's a simple first entry-level opportunity that can expand their horizons and open other doors for them. And I think that's a really great example of behind the scenes work and the importance of providing those opportunities to those deaf individuals for people to accomplish their career goals. And that's one way we can help.
That's perfectly said, because now there's people in the deaf community that watched Deaf U without knowing what the process looks like behind the scenes. And they say like, oh, that's not what I expected, or that didn't meet my expectations.
It's so trashy.
Yeah. They said it was trashy and awful. And I'm like,
yeah, no, I agree.
I'm like, okay, I get it. But at the same time, Deaf U made a difference within our community without really realizing it. And so by them acknowledging that and understanding the process, that would probably change their opinions about the show.
And not every movie can be everything for everyone. Again, let's parallel that to the queer community. You have gay films, queer films that for a long time were all white stories. For a long time, they were all the same story, one experience of queerness. And now, finally, they've branched out and incorporated trans stories, BIPOC stories, different age groups, young gay people, older gay people. Finally, they have diversified those films. And I think that the deaf community and deaf film, deaf storytelling, there aren't very many out there. It's a very small world. There's very slim pickings. And so that's a conflict because it's very easy to jump and criticize, right? It's very easy to criticize. But at the same time, we can add to that community and show more of that community. And we have to acknowledge, oh, well, is this movie perfect for all deaf people? Maybe not. I'm sure it has its flaws, but at the same time, you have to applaud that deaf person because that is part of the process. It's one small step. And you may watch a movie and say, well, that movie didn't fit my deaf experience, but don't criticize it. Say, okay, well, there's deaf representation. I'm happy there's different deaf people in the world. And you may watch something else where you feel that your deaf experience was matched and you do feel the same watching that. So acknowledging the good and the bad, not just being overly critical and negative about everything. Think of the movie The Sound of Metal. There's a hearing actor that plays a deaf role. That creates a problem. But the story is about the cochlear implant. And there's not a lot of stories in the deaf community about that. And they're talking about signing. A lot of my hearing friends have talked about the sound in that movie and realizing for the first time what it actually might mean to be deaf because they never realized that. And that's important experience for the hearing community to have. And it's not the only movie that's going to be made. There will be more, but there's important content being portrayed, and we need to acknowledge the good. And we can criticize. There should be a deaf actor in that role. So we have to create that balance, and it's really difficult to do that, but it's important to have that balance, because if we default to only criticizing, we neglect to see the good things that are represented as well.
Well, thank you for your time, energy, opening up your heart, and sharing your story. We really appreciate it. And wow.
Well, thank you.
You opened our eyes, and I'm sure you made an impact to our listeners. Really inspiring.
Hopefully, the listeners can learn a few things from our beautiful discussion today and how we can make this world a beautiful one.
Absolutely. I agree. Feel free to follow me on Instagram. It is I am that deaf kid. And my website is michaelepsteindesigns.com. Michael, Epstein, designs with an S.com. So feel free to follow me. If you have any questions about the work I do behind the scenes, feel free to email me, DM me through Instagram. I am happy to talk with anyone who would like to reach out. So let me know.
Well, we will definitely have our audience follow your website, take a look at all
your beautiful work. It's truly incredible.
Oh my gosh.
My next show will actually release, I believe, in November. It's called The Book of Boba Fett. It is a new Star Wars spinoff.
Ooh.
And it's being released this year in November. And then the next show, I'm not sure when it's going to be released, possibly in the spring, but it's called Obi-Wan Kenobi. And both will be on Disney Plus.
Wow.
So again, like I said, the first one in November and the next one next year, possibly in the spring.
So exciting. We are looking forward to it.
Perfect.
And for our listeners, if you have any questions, don't forget to email us at questions@whatthedeaf.com.
And find us on Instagram at whatthedeaf.
We'll see you next week. Bye, everyone.
Bye. We would like to thank dpan.tv and their services at aslcaptions.com for making the transcripts and captions of this podcast accessible for everyone.
If you're looking for captioning or transcript services, they do amazing work.